Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching the Britney Spears documentary on Netflix called Britney versus Spears. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch.
My secretary, Dolores Gamaros, who's like 5'4", was like elbowing everybody out of the way and getting her through the crowd and got her up to the office, which was just an unbelievable sight. But you can imagine what it is like for anyone to have to go through that.
Right. Can this kind of trauma, which I have no doubt it has that potential of severe traumatizing effect, can that cause dementia-like symptoms? Absolutely. I don't know if that's the case, but absolutely. I mean, we're only seeing these tiny snippets of this, and we're not in the room. Like, imagine being Britney, having all this danger, because celebrities get death threats. So how do you differentiate between just a regular douchebag paparazzi and someone who wants to kill you or harm you in various different ways? How do you know? I mean, it would just be terrifying. Could that cause dementia-like symptoms? 100%. Because you would be anxious, you would be suffering from acute trauma reactions, you might have dissociative effects, you might have like moments where your brain isn't working quite right. As an example, when people go through losses, like their spouse or their parents die or something, it's not uncommon to have cognitive problems after that because your body and mind are stressed out and you might forget things more, or your emotions might be up and down. And then this can cause sleep problems and, diet problems and other kinds of problems. You might turn to substances to try to just cope and get through the days. And this can cause more stress and more cognitive problems. And maybe that's what was happening. Or Britney legitimately has dementia and or some other disorder that looked like dementia. Maybe we'll find out.
So we walk into court, and I said, Your Honor, she doesn't want her father to be the conservator. She wants an independent to be the conservator. She clearly understood the concept of a conservatorship. She understood what was going to happen.
Okay, I think we've heard this before, but whether this is review or not, we're hearing from her lawyer during the beginning of this conservatorship discussion in court. She was at the very least understanding why the conservatorship was necessary and or wanted it. As I said, some people with conservatorships, they actually are like, please help me. Other people are like, well, under the circumstances, I concede that I need one. It sounds like she was that second category. I don't know. Or another possibility is like, look, I can't fight it. They have too much fraudulent information. I just can't fight that. So I give in. The other thing we're hearing, again, which we've heard before in previous documentaries, is that she's like, okay, fine, conservatorship, sure, but not my dad. Anyone else but my dad, independent person, which if you're a court, why wouldn't you go along with that? Why would you say, no, it must be your father? If a conservatorship is necessary, there are a lot of different organizations or even other family members who would be able to oversee that. Now, I will say that in the world that I come from, the family members usually are preferred because they presumably care more, they're more involved, they will volunteer more of their time and not charge for things. So maybe that was the thinking, I don't know.
I'm not going to say that in every case, every conservatorship case, it's inappropriate to have a family member as the conservator, right? That would be going too far. But I will say that I generally prefer to see an independent professional as the conservator. And the reason is that family relationships are always complex.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That if there's going to be a conservatorship, there's benefits to having it be a family member because maybe they care more, but to have things be as objective as possible, it should be an outside party, which the lawyer is saying that's usually what's appropriate. I don't know what's usually done. Maybe the lawyer will get into that.
The judge looked at me and said, Mr. Streisand, I have a report that says that she does not have the capacity to retain counsel and have an attorney-client relationship. So I'm sorry, Mr. Streisand, but you're not going to be able to represent her, and I need to ask you to leave the courtroom. And I did.
All right. So what that means is that a psychologist, forensic psychologist, evaluated her and determined that she was not mentally capable of being able to hire her own lawyer and or consult with an advocate in a meaningful way, that her dementia was interfering. In an extreme case, we could see how this could absolutely be legit, where, say, you have a grandparent or a parent who is suffering from Alzheimer's, and they have forgotten who you are. You are the loving daughter of your mom, who is 85 and suffering from Alzheimer's. And your mom is, wants to live on her own, wants to be able to drive her car, and you have observed many behaviors that indicate, and you've had her evaluated, that she has Alzheimer's and that she is not capable of driving or living on her own. And maybe you have to go to court. And your mom hires a lawyer, and she has a lot of money, and the lawyer, for whatever reason, makes a determination that your mom is capable of making such decisions, maybe motivated by the fact that he's getting paid by her. And the lawyer makes a case that your mom is totally capable and doesn't need conservatorship or blah, blah, blah. But you have an evaluation saying, my mom is not capable of understanding what's happening for her. Thus, she cannot hire a lawyer and cannot really inform a lawyer in a way that will be based in reality or something. So it sounds like that's what they had for Britney. Given what we've seen on Instagram and other kinds of, like that phone call that was recorded of her in court, she seems capable cognitively enough, but I haven't evaluated her. I can't tell. Usually when we're seeing someone that is, significantly suffering from dementia such that they're not allowed to have their own lawyer in a situation like this, and it's such a big deal, right, to have a conservatorship at that age, usually it would have to be pretty obvious, and I think it would be obvious to us. For example, she wouldn't be able to work anymore, definitely wouldn't be able to, do her own choreography and this kind of thing. So, but, so it's fishy, but we don't know. But it definitely is fishy.
Against it, but I never heard that he did.
We have very particular standards for conservatorship. You have to be unable to meet your needs for food, clothing, health, and shelter. So let me put it this way. I've represented dozens of conservatees in court. Not one of them has ever had a job.
Right, of course, that makes sense. And according to this expert, Britney Spears does not fit the profile of a typical person going through a conservatorship, which again lends itself to this fishiness. Now, I don't know if I showed you the clip, but she did have a lawyer, a court-appointed lawyer. And did that lawyer somehow drop the ball? It could be. The lawyer could have fought hard for Britney's, case. The other side could have had a very strong case. We haven't heard from the other side, as far as I can tell. No one from the conservatorship side has said, no, look at the 10 things that we saw back then. I would guess that there are dozens of data points that would justify not only the beginning of the conservatorship, but the ongoing conservatorship. Now, could all those things be fraudulent? Yes. Does it smell fishy given her level of seeming functionality and the diagnosis and the fact that there's so much money to be gained and the fact that the father is like, no, I will be the conservator, even though from the beginning she hasn't wanted me to be the conservator. You would think the father would be like, well, if she doesn't want me to be, I don't need me to be the conservator. I just really care about my daughter and I want her to be taken care of. So yeah, sure, let's hire an outside party and I'll be involved, involve me however you want. If you truly cared, you would think that you wouldn't need to be in control. Now, on the other hand, one could make an argument. As a father, you're like, no, she's my daughter and I don't want anyone messing around. I don't trust other people. I only trust me and family. Who knows? But what I have said before in other reaction videos, that I would suspect if I had access to all the data, I don't know, but I would suspect that I would come to two conclusions based on the tips of the iceberg that we've been seeing in these documentaries. One is that if there has to be a conservatorship, it should not be the father. Why would he have to be the conservator? Unless they can make an argument for that and Britney's okay with the conservatorship, then she should have some say in who's in control of her life, right? Okay, so that would be one. Number two, I suspect that the whole conservatorship, or at least the level of control over her life, is unnecessarily strict to her. That she should be allowed to have a lot more freedom in her life than she already has. And maybe even a plan of transition for the conservatorship to not be involved anymore, particularly because the kids are getting older. I don't know how old the kids are now, but if there's a problem, maybe she spends too much money here and there, it's her life, and she's not going to destroy anyone, and she's not going to harm her kids because her kids are now adults and they're able to advocate for themselves. So I would suspect that I would conclude that the father, at least we should give it a try and see what conservatorship is like without the father. And two, that the restrictions should be reduced because she deserves to see, let's see how she does. And I was a part of not conservatorships like this, but things like this where we would say, well, they're asking for more freedoms. Let's see how they do with it. And let's give a little bit more slack and see how it goes. And if it goes well, then we'll continue to do that. Because the principle that we should be following is people deserve freedoms, that they deserve to make their own choices. They deserve autonomy. And to take away one's freedoms, you have to have a real solid case for that, which doesn't appear to be the case.
Connected to the case and would like to remain that way. The report was produced by a doctor that resigned from the case in 2013. Look at this sentence right here. Read it out loud.
Britney Spears lacks the capacity to retain and direct counsel. Britney Spears lacks the capacity to understand or manage her own financial affairs without being subject to undue influence.
Okay, so this is what I expected, that there would have been an evaluation and a finding by a qualified forensic psychologist that her cognitive ability is impaired to the extent that she can't obtain her own counsel and consult with her own counsel in a way that will help her. That she's more of a danger to herself than otherwise if she did have counsel. And also that financial affairs, that she needs her financial affairs to be looked over because other people are going to influence her. Now, usually what we're looking at are people who are older, who are suffering from dementia of some sort, and they're being preyed upon by other people. People who know they have a lot of money and are saying, invest in this, or I hacked into your computer, and unless you give me $5,000, I'm going to destroy your computer. These kinds of things. And if there's a lot of money on the table, and you as the child or the grandchild of this individual being scammed are concerned, then sometimes these kinds of conservatorships are helpful to the individual. And that's what they're claiming. Is that accurate, or does it have evidence? Again, it's fishy.
What's wild is, at the same time this report was being written, Britney was already back to work. She was on the set of How I Met Your Mother.
Sir, please don't yell at me. Because when people yell at me, I have a tendency to start crying.
The episode was out within 2 months of the conservatorship starting.
When they're rude to you, hang up the phone.
And yet we have paperwork that says she had dementia.
Right. They're making a good case. This is a better documentary than others that we've seen thus far. That we have the diagnosis of dementia. We don't know what subsequent diagnoses there were, but either way, the fact that she could work and go on a TV show is evidence that it might be an inaccurate diagnosis, or at the very least, the diagnosis that she was suffering from was extremely minor and didn't affect her to the extent that they were making a claim of. And I've seen this happen before, actually, where how do I say this? The way the courts work in these situations is, and they're not always like this, but they can be, and I've seen it, where a psychologist comes in and diagnoses someone, and everything stems around that diagnosis. That the judge is like, well, the psychologist diagnosed her with dementia, so there you go. And we know that someone who suffers from dementia cannot manage their finance. There's a lot of assumptions that branch out from that one diagnosis. But the problem is the person giving the diagnosis or the condition itself is more of a gray zone where, yeah, they meet some of the criteria for dementia, enough to justify the diagnosis, but their functioning is high enough that they can go on a TV show and memorize their lines and hold it together long enough with maybe little effort. They can go on stage and write music and make albums and, da-da-da. So, yeah, they have some low-grade dementia, but it's not severe enough that we would take away all of their rights. Whereas I've seen in court, things get so focused. It's almost like and being from my end, as someone who has studied forensic psych, I could have gone into forensic psychology. I found it to be interesting but boring. It felt like homework. It was, it's forensic psychology sounds like you're Sherlock Holmes. It's not. It's sitting in front of your computer, just writing the same report seemingly almost over and over and over again. And you can get paid pretty well, but it wasn't for me. Let's just put it that way. And so what I've seen is that, there's this huge weight that gets put on this diagnosis. And from my end, as someone who did this kind of work briefly, I'll tell you that these constructs, dementia included, schizophrenia, bipolar, personality disorders, major depression, are unfit for the ability to consult with an attorney. These are squishy areas, in my opinion. And a lot of people in my field will admit, look, we're kind of just taking a guess here. We don't have this, when you go to the doctor and you have a broken bone, they take an x-ray, they see the bone is askew, and they're like, oh, you have a broken bone. That's hard science. Psychology, a lot of softness to the soft science. And usually when we're concerned with diagnoses, it's when we're trying to hone in on treatment for people, whether it's medication or psychotherapy. And so there's not as much consequence to the diagnosis. But when we go into the courtroom, the diagnosis can become extremely consequential, even though it is a soft science area, meaning that you bring Britney Spears into 10 different psychologists, you might get literally 10 different diagnoses. Well, which one is it? You have a broken bone and you go to 10 different physicians, they're all going to say, yep, that bone is broken. Because there's ways of measuring that are very discrete. When it comes to, is it dementia? Is it stress related? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? How severe is it? These are things that forensic psychologists have to make a determination on. And in my opinion, it's a lot of opinion. It's based on a lot of opinion, based on a lot of how you see things and, your bias and that kind of stuff. And we all know that at the time, there was a lot of news media about her, and we could absolutely imagine a white male, older forensic psychologist thinking that Britney is this young, frivolous, stupid woman who doesn't deserve power and is hysterical and all those kinds of things. We could absolutely imagine affected by the media. She's over-sexualized, these kinds of attacks that she would get. And that would conspire within a system that overemphasizes these diagnoses to cause her to lose all of her power, when a more reasonable response might have been more humane. Maybe just increase support, but not getting the courts involved. Just like, hey, Britney, I think you need a lot more people around you who, how about you come back to the court with like 5 people who are in your corner who seem to be rational and aren't trying to take away your money, and then we'll let you go. Something like that.
How is someone who is that ill well enough to go to work? Caution should also be exercised so as not to accelerate her return to work faster than her emotional recovery allows, lest she have a relapse that would undo the progress she has made thus far.
That was my suspicion as well, that there's an episodic nature to this, and we even saw evidence of this in her public behavior prior to this moment, who knows, but that there are times when she's doing okay. And then there are other times when she's not doing okay, whether that's dementia related or mood disorder related or something else. They're saying in the document, we need to be very careful about having her return to work because emotionally she might not be able to handle it. So, and I know a lot of people out there, including some of you watching, are 100% convinced that there's nothing wrong with her. She's being controlled by someone from the outside, which could be true. But we don't have I don't have enough information to make a determination about this. There's another possibility that she legitimately needed a help, whether it's a conservatorship or some other kind of support for her own safety and her own life. But it was episodic, that maybe 1 month out of the year, she was completely non-functional and destructive to herself and others. And the conservatorship was there to mitigate the damage during that 1 month. But for the 11 other months, she was fine. And the conservatorship was just there in case the symptoms came back. And she could absolutely handle going on a TV show, or absolutely handle going on tour, or absolutely handle writing her music. So that's another possibility that I'll float.
The medical team said that Britney lacked capacity, but who was the original doctor that made that decision? In looking at the publicly available court documents, there was only one name listed in the initial evaluation.
Right, that's another thing that happens. Again, I don't know, but I'm glad that we're just getting at least some hearsay. The other thing that is possible is none of these court documents are valid because it was an anonymous source that gave them all this stuff. It could all be doctored. We have to know that that's possible, but who knows? But it wouldn't be uncommon, similar to how these diagnoses become elevated and it's just like, it is, given to us from God that this diagnosis has, been bestowed upon us, when in reality was the opinion of one person on one particular day, and other people would have different opinions. The other thing that will happen is someone will make an evaluation that, this person is not fit to make their own choices about their legal situation, and thus can't have their own lawyer or can't hire their own lawyer. And those things will just get set in stone. And I've seen that as well, where judges, for whatever reason, will just be like, well, remember 6 years ago it was determined, instead of having some updates to it, or saying, well, is it possible that person was a little biased? Because this was just my opinion, was that as soon as you introduce the idea that maybe the diagnosis is just an opinion, and maybe this person's determination, the psychologist's determination, was, maybe a little foggy, maybe a little in the gray zone. Maybe someone else will come with something different. As soon as you start introducing those question marks into these legal proceedings, the whole thing falls apart, and no one wants that. The judge and the courts definitely do not want that. They want, because judges are used to very firm things, like how much money did that person embezzle? Was the murder weapon at the scene? They're used to these kind of concrete things because it feels so much better, especially when you're a judge and you're making a determination about people's lives. Like, it's a big deal and it's stressful. And these are human beings. And I'm friends with judges, federal judges, local judges, the stress that they are under. So we would imagine that and I've seen it, where there's this bias toward, look, a psychologist said it, so I'm just gonna stamp that with approval because they have the qualifications to make that determination, and we're not gonna question it, because as soon as you start questioning that, then we gotta question that, and we'll never know what to do. And judges, as everyone else, it feels better when we know what to do. It feels better when we just say, look, we've, and especially when you have a young woman who everyone thinks is, slutty on TV or crazy or irresponsible or blonde or whatever kind of biases and prejudices that people have about various different identities that Britney possesses. You could imagine a court system just being like, look, these experts said it, it's set in stone, there's this diagnosis, there's this determination, I don't care how long ago it was, it's fact, it is a fact. And this woman is, trying to advocate for herself, but we all know she's hysterical, so let's move forward. I don't want to hear any more information. I could absolutely imagine that happening. And, it's possible that it did, given what we've seen.
Doctor that had conducted the medical evaluation that kept the conservatorship in place.
We're ready for Slate.
And what the justification was.
Dr. James?
Spar.
Take one. Mark? Dr. Spar, tell me about your work.
I am a retired geriatric psychiatrist and still do, the occasional consultation for attorneys. including, contested conservatorships sometimes.
So he's a geriatric psychiatrist, retired, and I'm guessing he was consulted because he's an expert on dementia conservatorships and usually working with older people, not someone in their 20s. That's just my guess.
Well, I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, so that's one of the things that geriatric psychiatrists spend a lot of time and energy on, yeah.
Is that why you were brought in to evaluate Britney Spears?
I'm not going to verify that I was ever brought in to evaluate Britney Spears.
So there is a confidentiality thing that some people have to follow. Whether that's what's happening right now or not, I don't know. But, that's a whole reason. I think that's what lends itself to all the conspiracy theories and all the speculation, is because there's reasons why we don't know any information. And when we don't know information, but we have a little bit of information, then we make our own story about what's happening. And there's legal confidentiality, there's medical confidentiality. So I think that's what we're bumping up against, and we might not ever know because of these reasons.
So here is a court document said, according to Dr. Sparr's declaration.
Okay, again, show me my signed declaration. If you show me a public document with my signature on it, I will verify my signature. Other than that, I'm not going to talk about whether anybody ever retained me to see anybody, not just Britney Spears. These are all confidential evaluations.
Right, and that's the way it should be. I know it's frustrating. We'd like to have him spill the info, but if you were evaluated by him, you would not want him to talk about you, would you, without your consent, right? So, I'm glad that he's being combative and a little smarmy about it, but and people ask me that stuff too. They'll be like, "Can you talk about it?" I'm sorry, I can't. I'd like to think I would be nicer and a little less smarmy about saying I'm sorry, that's confidential information, but yeah, I'm glad that he's upholding HIPAA and his ethical codes.
Involved. The person who's filing for the conservatorship believes that they are acting in the interests of the proposed conservatee. They're trying to protect them from something. Usually, most of the cases I've been involved in, what they're trying to protect them from is a predatory individual after that person's money.
Okay, interesting. So he's saying that usually it's the conservator is seeking conservatorship because they're trying to protect the conservatee from a predatory person who's trying to take their money. And usually that person is older and suffering possibly from dementia. And, it's interesting because, this happens sometimes, right? Let's say you're 80 years old and you have a little bit of dementia, but you still, you're able to make choices for yourself. And you fall in love with a young whippersnapper and you start, putting that person in your will. And it's totally your choice. And your kids and your grandkids are very much against putting that person in your will because they're looking forward to the money. Well, now you get into this discussion in a court of, is this person able to make a choice? Are they being preyed upon by this young whippersnapper, or did this older person just fall in love with a younger person and it's their choice? So, it raises all sorts of questions of freedom, of motivation, right? Like, it's highly motivated by money. Are you really concerned about the individual, or is this just concerned about money? I don't think I showed the clip before, but Britney, according to people who were close to her, didn't really care that much about money. She liked to perform, she liked to sing, and so if she's going to meet someone and they ask for money and she's giving them a lot of money, maybe it's just like, look, I have enough money to give her out. I don't really care. So, and maybe the parents were like, no, and you could see a situation where you could blame the dementia instead of saying, well, instead of finding that, well, maybe she does suffer from some cognitive issues, but isn't she allowed to spend her money or give her money to whoever she wants? And just because you have a little bit of a cognitive problem, does that mean that any decision you make is generated from that place? Some of us have depression or anxiety or something, and let's say we make a choice that one of our family members doesn't think is a very good choice. Can they bring us into court and say, well, they're depressed, and so that's making them do this other thing? Where's that line? Now, for some people, I absolutely think it's justified to help individuals who are being preyed upon. But is that what's happening with Britney? I don't know. Doesn't seem like it from the outside, from the very limited information that we were presented. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.